We are starting a brand new series today called LiveSTRONG Without Cheating. If you're familiar at all with the sports world, you're familiar with the fact that Lance Armstrong won 7 Tour de France titles, only to have them snatched away from him because of taking drugs that were illegal in order to give him more stamina. But there's another aspect to his life too that we know, and that is that he is a cancer survivor. And out of his cancer experience, which was fairly extensive, he developed an organization called LiveSTRONG. And it is all about how to live healthy. Actually, if you've ever gone to the website and looked at it and read anything with regard to it, you actually, it's very helpful. It's very good. It is extremely helpful as related to health. The irony is that here's someone who is putting illegal substance into his body, but at the same time is very bent on helping people to live healthy lives. And what we find to be true is that when we guide our own lives, when we live our lives according to our plans, we may accomplish some significant things, we may do some even great things, but it seems like there's always some areas that are missing. And so they have a tendency to then undo often all the good that we do. And so, I'm not an expert on Lance Armstrong, and I'm kind of taking his statement, Live Strong, which I think is an excellent statement, and he certainly, when it comes to ability to ride a bike long distances and a lot of other issues, is overcoming the cancer and those kinds of things, certainly with the help of medical field. He knows some things about how to live strong. But I think unless you know the God of this universe, the God who became personal through the person of Jesus Christ, you can not truly live strong in the best kind of way. You'll only be marginally living strong, or in areas of your life living strong. But if you have and develop a relationship with God, you have the capability of living strong and going the long haul. And so we're going to call it Live Strong Without Cheating. Because when you cheat in life, you get ahead momentarily, but ultimately it sets you further behind than you could ever make up for the rest of your life. He'll never be able to compete again in any kind of a bike race the rest of his life. Those trophies have been snatched away from him. And so there's nothing he can do to rebuild that, regain that. He can do other things, but he can't do anything there. And whenever we live strong without cheating, it's a life that's able to live without the regrets and without the backlash that comes because we've cheated. And so today we're going to start this series, and we're basing this entire series on the life of Joseph in the Bible, as found in Genesis, beginning at chapter 37. And so if you have your Bibles, you might just want to open them up to Genesis 37. If you don't, it's on the handout beside you there. You can go ahead and grab it up. If you want to just watch on PowerPoint, you can do that as well. And so what I would like to say about the story of Joseph is this. Joseph's one of those individuals in the Bible who tended to get things right more than he did wrong. In other words, he's a person who lives strong without cheating. Now today's lesson, on the relationship lesson, it's going to sound like that I'm saying that Joseph didn't handle relationships great. And in some sense, there's some truth to that, but you also have to remember that Joseph we're talking about in this story today was 17 years old. So there's still some growth and development, maturity. And he was dealing with adults all around him, and he maybe didn't handle everything perfectly in the situation, but there's some lessons we can learn. You know, you can learn from positive examples, and you can learn from negative examples. I've known some people who were raised in a home environment that was very dysfunctional, and somewhere along the way, they decided they weren't going to live their life that way, and so they learned even from a very negative example how to do things differently. So we can learn from all of those. And so this will be about the only lesson that we give in the life of Joseph that actually, you would say, has a few negative connotations to it about how he handled some things. And so I'd like for us just to pray together here at the outset of the series and ask God's wisdom and blessing on it. Jesus, we commit what we're going to share here today to you. And as Tim said earlier in his prayer, that you would take it and divide it and share it just as you know we have need. We're going to look at some different aspects of relationships today. And all of us are in the process with relationships. None of us have arrived. None of us have achieved this level of perfection in relationships. We still struggle at times. We still are dealing with how to do it best. We're still having to exercise, so to speak, every day our ability to do relationships and do them right. And so I pray that the lessons that you give us here would lodge into our hearts as each of us have need. And just as that little boy took his lunch and gave it to you, today, Lord, I'm here giving you this lunch, so to speak, and you bless it and you break it and give it in just the way that you see need. And then I would also pray, God, that throughout this series, that we would learn some vital lessons about how to live our lives more effectively because of this really wonderful example that we find in Joseph's life. And so what you do in our lives, in our hearts, to strengthen us, to give us the ability to make a difference on Monday morning and on Thursday afternoon and every day of this week, we want to embrace that and take it with us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Memory verse at the top of your sheet says this: better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife. Relationships make all the difference in the world about how we are able to function. Whenever relationships are in chaos, it feels like that our life is falling apart. Whenever relationships are going well, it feels like it just sort of puts wind under the wings of our life. And it's interesting that the wise man Solomon said, actually just having a dry piece of crust would be better than being at a feast if there's strife there. You know, there's something about strife that causes us all to want to kind of look for cover or make a new door where there wasn't one. Get out of there, go. Now, I will say this. There are a few people in life that like strife, but I need to tell you, if you were sitting here right now and just thinking, well, actually, I kind of think strife, I like it. I like to stir it up. I like to make it happen. I just want to tell, I have a word for you, okay? You're sick. I'm just telling you, you're sick and you need help. So don't raise your hand or anything, because Rick's not here this morning, so I would just have to, we'll just take you over to him, and get you the help you need. So most people who are normal do not like strife. We can't always avoid it, but we certainly don't seek it out. And so just memorize that verse, and when you're causing strife this week, wonder why you're standing by yourself a lot. Anyway. Scripture lesson is taken from Genesis 37, verses 1 to 11. And how we're going to do this morning is I'm going to just walk down, you're going to take you down to the outline, and we're going to walk through these verses as we go through the outline. And so we're talking about relationship lessons here, things that we can learn out of Joseph's life. And remember again, he's 17 years old at the time this is all taking place. And so make sure that you look at it through those lenses. And so the first one is, be careful how you talk about others. Be careful how you talk about others. Look at verse 2. We'll go ahead and read verse 1 just to bring us into through the chapter. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. And we'll talk more about Jacob later, but remember, Jacob was a twin. He and Esau were born twins, and they are they're descendants of Abraham and beginning of the Jewish nation. And so the 12 tribes are actually named out of Jacob's family. And so there's a lot of significant history in this family, and these are what you call the founding fathers, so to speak, of the Jewish nation. And so Joseph, going into verse 2, Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, remember, he's 17. Most of these guys are quite a bit older than he was. We'll see here, Joseph was born a little bit later. He's one of the youngest boys out of all of Jacob's sons, and he had a lot of them. So he's 17 years old. He's out there with a bunch of grown men, and they're acting like grown men, but they're acting kind of like bad grown men. Okay, these weren't Sunday school teachers. His brothers. They were doing some things. We don't know everything they were doing, but you can let your imagination go. These guys were doing some things that weren't all that great. Joseph, who was very close to his father, probably had a lot more lessons growing up about what right and wrong was and everything else, and so here he is, very close, and he's going out and he's looking, and he's going, wow, these guys are doing some outrageous things, you know. We went into that town, and wow, they did this, they did that, they did the other. And so he's, I don't know what his conversation was with them. What we know is he went to his father as a very good young man, and he gave his father a bad report about them. I'm not going to criticize Joseph for doing that, because he was probably just trying to be a good kid. Okay, he's probably trying to do the right thing. But I'm going to jump to us with regard to how this applies in our lives today. And I want to say, because you can see how this worked out for Joseph, or I should say didn't work out for him, to go talk to his dad about his brothers, not saying he shouldn't have, as a young boy trying to help his dad out, or help his brothers out even. There's a high possibility, based on further conversation we see here, that he actually did approach them, and that they probably just kind of pushed him aside as a little kid, a little brother. So here is what I would recommend from this situation to you and me today. If you have an issue with someone, don't go talk about them to other people. Go to them first. If you want a good reference in Scripture for that, Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 to 17. I'm not going to read them for you, but basically it's a three-step formula that Jesus laid out for how you deal with conflict between you and other people. And so go to the person first. You say, well, I don't know if the person would listen to me. I might make them mad. Well, do you think it would make them any less mad if they knew you went around and talked to everybody else about them rather than talk to them? And so it's easier to talk about people than it is to talk to people. But if you really want to solve problems, it's best to talk to people. And if there's a conflict or something you think is wrong, either relationally between you, or there's someone that you feel like needs rebuked in some way, you go to the person and you rebuke them. Now, here's another question, and this has to do for us to think about in relationship, to be careful how you talk about others. Whenever you go talk to someone else about a problem, here's a question you should always ask yourself. Is the person I'm talking to part of the problem or part of the solution? If they're not part of the problem or part of the solution, you know what we call that? Anybody? Gossip. You're with me. Thank you. And gossip is in my opinion, it's cancer within Christianity. It's a cancer. When people are allowed to gossip, or when they gossip freely, it's like a cancer. It causes all kinds of problems within the body of Christ and within the kingdom of God. And so make sure that if you're talking to someone about it, you're not just talking to them for the fun of sharing juicy, because a lot of times juicy gossip, because a lot of times how we kind of rationalize gossip is, well, it's the truth. It may be the truth. The question is this person a part of the solution or part of the problem? If they're not, then you really probably shouldn't be talking to them about it. Now, another question to ask or to think about with regard to this is, I need to personally evaluate how I use my influence. If you can waste your influence by going around talking to all the wrong people. And then instead of being a person who solves problems or addresses issues or helps to resolve matters, you become a person who actually comes of ill reputation because you get named as a gossip, somebody that is not trustworthy. And so I would just, as a last statement on this, number one, say this: use great caution when you talk about someone. And here's the reason why. It's because it is only a hairbreadth away from sinning. You're only a hairbreadth away from sinning. Now, I know it's not a sin like robbing a bank, but it can sometimes be a sin like murder if you're damaging someone's reputation or doing them harm in some way by the things that you're saying and avoiding facing it and dealing with it straight on. So be careful about how you talk about other people. Number two, being partial in relationships is not a good policy. Being partial is not a good policy. Now, I want you to look at verse 3 as we go on down through the scripture here. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than any, and Israel happens to be Jacob, by the way. If you're not familiar with that, he was renamed Israel. And so here in the NIV, I'm not sure why they didn't make that clear, but Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Did you hear what I said? He loved him more than any of his other sons. He had a lot of sons. He loved him more. Because he had been born to him in his old age. And, if you're the oldest of a family of a whole lot of kids, or quite a few kids, this probably does happen pretty often, that the baby of the family, does kind of get babied a little bit more or whatever. But it's real easy if you're one of the older ones to look back and forget about and think that, the 5 spankings you had growing up were 500 or something. And this kid, you've never, just sort of almost getting on the parents. You never correct them. You never do. You never, anyway. But in this case, Joseph really was preferential. And so he was so preferential, he made an ornate robe for him. I don't know what he was thinking. We have a phrase, my kids and I, and it's kind of like I have all these little catchphrases that mean something in different situations. And one of them is maybe we're doing something and something goes wrong. And so we stop and go, well, what were we thinking? So it's like, what were you thinking? What were we thinking? What were you thinking? And so I asked that question here. He made him an ornate robe just for Joseph. This coat of many colors that we read about, we've heard about. And I'm going to go, what were you thinking? I mean, come on, Israel. What were you thinking? Oh, I just love him so much. I want him to have the Nike shoes. I want him to have the whatever the latest names are. So, it's funny. Sometimes you see these latest names worn on clothes. If you have names on your clothes, I love them. Just love it. Anyway, but you see, and then sometimes it's like you see them in Goodwill too and everything. It's like, you don't, so it sort of loses its meaning sometimes of prestige. But in this case, they didn't have Saks Fifth Avenue close by. So he had this coat specially made for Joseph, and he didn't have one made for the rest of them. So here is Joseph walking around in this beautiful, he's uptown, man. He is the uptown guy. And all the rest of them, smell like dirty shepherds that they were. I'm not being dirty, but I'm saying they were shepherds, and just, they come in and smell like, and here Joseph's walking around in his nice coat. Why? Because his dad loved him more than everybody else, all the other sons. Now, let me just talk to you how this looks like in our lives a little bit. Have you ever, don't raise your hand on this one, please, especially if your parents are here. Have you ever had a parent say, why can't you be more like your sister? And I picked that one because I'm thinking that's the more frequent one. I don't think most often parents are going, why aren't you more like your brother? You know, like, oh, whatever you do, don't be like, sorry guys, but there's truth there, gotta say it. Why can't you be more like your sister? Think about what that sounds like to the kids you said it to. See, feeling and being partial, I think, is to be human. I don't know that there's any way we could actually keep ourselves from having partiality, some sense of partiality. There's just, it's in us. We like some things better than others. I mean, I saw people walk in with Dunkin' Donut coffees today, and I was just thinking, these are the wise people of Westtown. These people know what life is about. These people are on track. I mean, I bet you they're spiritual giants too. It's just across the board. That's such a sign of wisdom. And then you occasionally see Starbucks coming through, and you're thinking, oh, my goodness, I believe there's hope for them. I think, those are our seekers here. We're hoping to reach them, And so we're all have partiality in various things. And so it's human. It's human to be partial. It's even human sometimes to feel like, man, I do, in your brain, you're thinking, I wish all my kids were just like that when they're, and if they were all like that, we'd probably be good in this game, of life. And so it's human to have some of those feelings. But I want to tell you that if you act out on those feelings in your partiality, that you are going to create division. You're going to see it unfold here in this story. You're going to create division. You're going to create anger. You're going to create bitterness. And there are certain scenarios where it's okay to be a little more partial in a given situation, but where there is genuine, outright partiality, hey, your wardrobe is going to be the best because I love you so much. Can I have something too? I don't know. We're going by Goodwill a little bit. We'll see if we can find you something here. Just that kind of like difference is, and I'm nothing against Goodwill. I'm just saying if you buy Goodwill clothes, buy them for everybody, okay? And actually, you might dress better than some people who go to Walmart. But anyway, overt partiality is simply proactively stirring up problems in your world. If you are overtly partial to people around you, that can be coworkers, that can be in your family, that can be in a variety of scenarios that you have with your children. You are proactively stirring up problems. You are creating problems by that. I have 4 kids, and 2 are adults and 2 are small, so I can't make straight comparisons to everybody. But what I notice is there are certain things that I see in some of them that I'm going, I really admire that quality, or that really concerns me. And so if I were to look across the board and I see this quality, I might feel like I wish all of them had that quality. I wish they were, in a sense, all like that. But if you see things that maybe you admire, you respect, and it makes you proud, and you kind of, you feel like that's a really, really good thing, and you see that in them, you just have to understand that all of us have some really high qualities and some pretty serious negatives, And so what we do is we have to learn to appreciate the high qualities within the one child and understand there are some challenges there too, and appreciate the high qualities of this one and deal with the challenges that are there. And in one sense, you might say it would be natural, if one lines up more of those high qualities, to feel a little partial toward them. I'm not saying that you couldn't feel that. I'm just simply saying be very careful how that gets acted out in your life, because if it becomes really obvious and it becomes something that becomes a wedge within your family. And I would never say this is easy, but I would say it's important for us to pay attention to. Very important. Number 3, how you talk to others is telling. Verse 4. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they cheered and celebrated. No, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. I wonder what that looked like. When they were out, if he was out there tending sheep with them sometime or something like, hey, jerk face, go do the whatever, I don't know. But they couldn't say a kind word. I mean, it means they weren't nice to him. They didn't say good things to him. There was nothing about their conversations with him that was uplifting. It was all downgrading. They couldn't say a nice word to him. Do you know that how you talk to others is very telling about you? They hated him. And later we'll see that they were exceedingly jealous of him. There's a little formula that I came across a number of years ago, and I actually have seen it about 3 studies, and they all fall within a 1 percentage point of each other. And this is just the one that kind of was right in the middle, and so I've adapted to this. It has to do with communication. I want you to write down 3 numbers: 7, 38, and 55. Does anybody know what those 3 numbers total, just real quickly, if you have one of those math brains? Pardon me? What is the 3 number total to? 100. Okay, 100. Now, I think, Jeff, you were ahead of me there in saying what these represent. 7% of communication is by what? Words. By words. That means when you're having this big talk and you're just blah, blah, like blah, 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 on and on. If it's just based on words alone, 7%. Anyone want to guess? And some of you probably know this, but in me, different studies are a little different, but not much. 38%, what that represents. Tone of voice. Your tone of voice. The way you say it. 55%, anyone else? Body language. We're all on there, aren't we? Body language. I've told this to a number of couples who've been talking about communication, and so if you've heard it before, just, put your finger in your ear or something. But I used to, years ago, feel like I had a phone phobia. Like, if there was sort of a conflict or a challenge or something like that, I didn't want to talk on the phone. I didn't mind dealing with the conflict. I just wanted to go talk to the person in person. And I just thought, man, I've got a phone phobia. But what I realized after studying communication, I'm like, no, I think I intuitively kind of knew this was very limited. I couldn't see body language. You can pick up on tone of voice, but people can still disguise that a little bit. And so whenever you get full communication, it's words, tone of voice, and body language. That's what gives you the summary of full communication. And so if someone screams at you, if you say something, well, I don't even feel, to your spouse, well, I don't even feel like you love me. I do love you. Do you think the person's going like, man, they really love me? I mean, they're like yelling that they love me. No, I think they're going, I think they hate me. It doesn't matter what you say, how you said it makes all the difference in the world. The tone of voice and body language is like, I'm thinking I'm leaving now. And so what we have to understand is how you talk to others is huge. These guys couldn't say a good word. Now, understand Joseph's 17. If he hadn't gone through all the things he's going to go through, we're going to walk through with him. And he hadn't had psychology 101 yet. He's still 17. But I'm going to tell you this. This should have been the first hint to him these relationships weren't going too well. That he wasn't really like on his brother's favorite list. And so they couldn't even say anything nice to him. Some reason he wasn't picking up on it completely, but let's get the lessons for us. How to talk to others. How many of you here have a dog? Can I see your hands if you have a dog? Okay. I'm a dog person. I'm not a cat person. So if you have cats, I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you with that. And I don't really know how to help you with a dog much, but I do. I'm a dog person. We have a yellow lab, and she's 4.5 years old. And so she should know better. But she has this thing, and most dogs kind of have one person that ends up being their master. So I am her master, but I've been a pretty terrible master, so she's still kind of a terrible dog in a way, you know. But we've got a few things worked out. We have a nice pen for her that she gets to come. She doesn't stay in the house, but she does get to stay in the garage at nighttime, and she's in the backyard rest of it. We don't let her run loose because she still likes to dig up stuff, and Vanjie plants a new plant and she's thinking she wants to put it someplace else and stuff like that. And so we do keep her in an area, but she really doesn't like being confined to that area. And so when you go to take her out in the morning to her area, she wants to sit on the back patio, just sit down, and she weighs 100 pounds. She wants to sit down on her haunches and go, see if you can get me there. Just see. Now, I need to tell you, I can get her there. And when I go to take her out the door to get on that patio, she doesn't sit down. She trots right where she's supposed to go. And so I get her hooked up there and go on. But there's been times I've left, early and thought, well, I hate to put her out. It's cold out and all that stuff. So leave her for Vanjie to put out later. When Vanjie takes her out the door and she gets to that patio, she sits those haunches right down and just see what you can do with this 100 pounds. So I wish I could have a movie camera of this. It doesn't work because I'm never there. Otherwise I'd be doing it. But Vanjie tells me that Skylar gets behind and starts pushing. And she's pulling as hard as she can. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. So here's my philosophy. It's all in how you talk to the dog. When I speak to the dog, I have different voices. One of them is, oh, come here, sugar baby, I'm just like, ah. And I have another one going, hey, stop that. And then I have another one going, go now. And I mean now, get yourself up and go now. Now, I don't know how she knows those different voices, but she knows them. And I'm not going to tell you how I taught her those different voices, but anyway, she knows what different voices mean. And so if I speak to her in a certain way, she responds differently. And I can just hear Vanjie going, now come on, Savannah. Come on, baby, we got to get down here. Now, Skylar, push on her, come on. And even when she raises her voice, she's going, I can't believe you're such a bad dog. You're such a, and it still sounds like this Savannah, oh, I love you. You're such a sweet puppy and all this stuff. So I'm just going to tell you, how you talk to people makes a huge difference. Animals too, but in particular, bring it back to people, how you talk, and people pick up on it. If dogs can pick up on it, people pick up on it. And so a lot of times we want to say in a relationship, well, what I said was, well, let's back that up. Let's reel that back. And let's take in tone of voice and body language, and then let's reevaluate what you said. Because it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. This is a terrible reality that I hate to say, but I need to say it. Isn't it true that often we speak worse to those closest to us than we do complete strangers? Wouldn't it be interesting if we were truly recorded one day, all day long, and we had to sit down and listen to it, and we didn't know we were recorded all day long? All right, you idiots, get up now and go to, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not saying what anybody would say, but I just wonder if there wouldn't be a few things that would surprise us. I don't want one in my car. I don't say bad words. Sometimes they're not the nicest words either, but they're not building up kind of words. Where'd you get your license? Anyway, stuff. But I do remember one example, and I'll give you this quickly and then we'll move on. Just to tell you, it isn't even always in yelling or anything else. Sometimes it's a variety of ways. I remember one day, this is like maybe 5-6 years ago or something like that. Vanjie and I were having a discussion. I can't say it was an argument, but we were definitely, it was a discussion that was warming up. And I felt like, I needed to kind of like cool it down just a little bit or something, and so she was, sharing whatever she was sharing. I don't even remember what it was, but if I was, I'd probably tell you, but anyway, I don't, just kind of just sharing. So I'm kind of thinking, just want to kind of just bring this temperature just down a little bit or whatever. And so how I answered to her, answered very calmly, very politely, very whatever. And she turned and she looked at me and she goes, "Don't use your counseling voice on me." And I'm like, "You've never even said it in a counseling session, I don't think. So how do you know? How do you know that I use a different voice in there?" So, but in her mind, she's going like, I'm going to try to pull some psychology on her or something, and just like, "Don't you do that, And it doesn't matter just what words we use. It's how we use them. How you talk to others is telling. Number 4. Think before you speak. I know that's like, well, Rod, we all know that. We just have a hard time doing it. Well, let's look at verses 5-8, and let's look how Joseph probably should have stopped and thought before he spoke here, especially based on verse 4. Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. This is going south really bad. It just keeps going downhill. Hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had." Remember, he's 17 years old, okay? I'm going to say this is youthful innocence and ignorance. He may have been firing them up. I don't know, but I don't think so based on the rest of his character that we see in his life. He's talking about he and his brother. "We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." I'm just thinking, what were you thinking, Joseph? His brother said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Folks, God's all in this story, okay? And we're going to see so many God factors in this whole story. And it was kind of important for these guys to know this for what happens later on. But at the same time, from a human standpoint in your relationships today, I would just say, let's learn a lesson here from Joseph and think a little bit before we speak. And here's a couple of pointers for us to think about how it relates to us. First of all, know your audience. Know who you're talking to. If you don't know who you're talking to, you can say some really, really hurtful and dumb things, even though it may not sound dumb to you. Then ask this question. Does this person really need to hear what I'm about ready to say? Do they need to hear that? Or do I have a need to tell them? Have you ever noticed, I'll use this example because it feels kind of safe for me, but it's like my mom. I remember she's passed away now for years, but she was visiting here in Augusta, and I think while she was here, I had to take her to a doctor's appointment or something. So we were down at University Hospital, and we were going up this elevator, and there were about 5 other people in there, and we're just stand there like you do in an elevator. Sometimes you talk. It was just quiet, and we're standing there, and I'm just thinking about where we're going to take her to the doctor and that kind of thing. And she just said out loud to everybody, she goes, "This is my son." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, And he's a pastor here in town. And she's like, I'm like, "Okay, Mom, people are, that's nice, all that stuff." Well, she wanted to say that for her sake. It didn't matter. She just had an audience closed up in the elevator, so she just told them whatever she wanted to tell them about. It really made her feel good. It wasn't. I said, "You maybe ought to talk to people at church before you brag about that." But anyway, but do people need to hear what you have to say? Sometimes we say it because we just want to tell everybody. Yeah, I went to Hawaii last week in the elevator with a bunch of strangers. Like, okay, we hate you too. No, anyway. Another question to ask is, do they care about what you say? Because if people don't care what you have to say, sometimes you set yourself up for hurt and pain that you wouldn't necessarily need. And then Last question, can you trust them with information? Joseph's brothers hated him already. They weren't trustworthy with this information. Just in kind of an example, another example in the Bible, Herod told the wise men who were leaving, hey, come back and tell me where you find him. I'm so interested. But God said, no, I can't trust him with that information. You guys go back a different way. There's some people you can't trust with information. You need to be able to discern that. Number 5, keep other people's feelings in mind. If you ever hear someone say, or if you hear yourself say this, well, I don't give a rip what people think. They can feel that way if they want to feel that way. Just know that you're being a very insensitive person and probably need to learn some relationship lessons. I'm not saying there's never a time to feel as though it's not their business or it doesn't, mind. I'm not saying that. But when you're talking, when you're communicating, when you're sharing with other people, keep in mind how other people are feeling. And here's just a few thoughts about that. Ask yourself how you think they will feel about what you say. Will this make them feel better or worse? If I tell this person that I just spent 2 weeks in Hawaii, will that make them feel better or worse? Can they celebrate that with me, or maybe they're stuck in a grind where they can't do that and that make them feel bad? You just have to think, you have to know your audience. You have to know who you're talking to. Ask yourself how you think they would. You can't always know. Here's another question to ask is, will it be helpful? If I share this with them, will it be helpful? You're thinking before you speak. Will this be helpful? Am I self-promoting? And my mom, who's like a saint, she was self-promoting on that. This is my son, in whom I'm well pleased. Are you? Anyway. She wasn't always that way with me, I can tell you that. But this is another question to ask. Do I have to tell everything I know? Well, I experience this. I just like for everybody to know. Why do you want everybody to know? Then the last question I want to ask is, am I carrying gas or water? Water puts fires out, gas makes fires worse. Am I going to improve the situation or am I going to make it worse? What will it be? Number 6, jealousy is a serious relationship killer. Let's look now, if we would, at verses. We'll pick up at verse 9 because I kind of walked through the thought without the verses. Let's go on to verse 9, and I'll read down through the rest. Then he had another dream. And here's the amazing part. And he told it to his brothers. So I'm like, Joseph, I know you're only 17, but at this point, you got to be paying attention here. These guys aren't liking your stories or your dreams. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and I can hear the groan that goes up. Oh, no. And this time, the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, even his dad, who loved him so much he gave him this great coat and loved him more than all his brothers, even his dad said, he rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? And if Joseph had known the future, he could have said, yeah, you will. But anyway, we didn't know the future at that point. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father did keep the matter in mind. So his father didn't totally discount it. He's going, something unique's going on here. Don't know what it is, but something unique is going on. But his brothers were jealous of him. This is the first time we see the word jealous as it relates to them. And that's a certain kind of hatred that happens. And I just want to give us a few life lessons out of this fact that jealousy is such a serious relationship killer. I want to say this, putting others down does not lift you up. Putting others down does not lift you up. It may momentarily, but in the long run, it will not lift you up. Jealousy gives up too much mental real estate to be worth it. The very person you despise occupies your mind. Now think about that. The very person you despise, you've given them this big disk space on your brain. And you're thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking about them. Why would you do that? Jealousy is a cancer to the person who holds it. It will destroy you. It will eat you up. And we'll see how these guys' jealousy ate them up to make some really, really bad choices.